I am Larry Rifkin. Maybe you remember me with an 800 number, right? That indicia when I was on Connecticut Public Television asking you for money. Well, I've had that surgically removed, and I'm still here. I was also with Denise on a radio program, as she said. It was wonderful. She was my producer. And I am the host of the podcast America Trends, podcast.com. We talk about social, political, environmental, technological changes emerging in our society. And Jack Hitt is with us today. He's really the one you've come here to see. And he is a remarkable guy who's going to be talking about the future of the automobile as he has described it in his writings in the New York Times Magazine and other periodicals. It's a fascinating topic because there's much that we have heard about it. Driverless cars, flying cars, and whether a car becomes a utility that we call for only when needed and not actually possess. It's interesting how the car and the open road were symbols of freedom to my baby boom generation. Yet today, the smartphone is the succeeding generation's conveyance to the open waters. What's really fascinating about today's talk, and listen very carefully because Jack is going to talk about the possible convergence of the two, and he'll explain what that means. Now, Jack has written on this subject and so many others as a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine, Harper's, Esquire, on and on and on, and the public radio program, the standout series, This American Life. He created a podcast for the program a few years back called Uncivil, which revealed the untold stories of the Civil War. His work was awarded a Peabody in 2018, the highest honor in the industry. And finding its way back into entertainment news is a movie featuring Martin Sheen and his son Emilio Estevez. Released some years back, it's based on characters from Jack Hitt's book, which is really a wonderful book called Off the Road, a modern-day walk down the Pilgrim's route into Spain. So maybe Jack can describe why this film is coming out today and perhaps why it resonates so well. The movie was originally out in 2010. In doing a little research on Jack, aside from the many accomplishments that I've described and others that I don't have time for, I was fascinated to read that instead of talking about cars today, we might have been hearing him teach us Latin. Now, does anybody teach Latin any longer? My apologies to Miss McGrath, my great Latin teacher. But he was quoted in The Atlantic as saying, "Upon graduation, my classics teacher warned me that I'd read the 100 or so greatest works of Latin literature. But postgraduate work meant reading the 1,000 works of Latin literature. I seized my diploma, and I've never translated a line of Latin since." Jack and his family live right here in the area. We are thrilled to have him with us today. And after this incredibly entertaining presentation, I've seen a glimpse. Your questions will be fielded by him, not me. Ladies and gentlemen, Jack Hitt.
I think you sit up there. Okay, sit all right. Thank you, Larry. So, I frankly don't know quite why. Let me see, can I get this started? Okay, there we go. And there we go. How about this? This one? No? How about this one? Okay, people. There we go. So I was just going to say, I don't even know why I'm here because we all know what the future of the car is. All you have to do is pick up any magazine, look at the internet, it's all over the place. Car, you know it's coming. This is Europe's most famous flying car. It's the Aeromobile, made in Slovakia. Takes off on a golf course, and that peppy music tells you it's pretty easy to fly, it's fun to fly. It's a smooth ride, it does require a pilot's license. Still, there it is, almost to the market. The Aeromobile, the cutting edge of car and air travel from Slovakia. Who knew? Of course, America has one. This is a standard, fits into your garage. You can fill it up at the pump. See there? Americans, we love our convenience, so that's our flying car, right? The wings open with a push button. Don't you love it? Yeah. You just drive to the airport, very simple. Hit the button, open up the wings, and take off. Turns out there's a bunch of these car companies. There's at least a dozen. This is the Klein Vision car. It seats two. It looks a whole lot like the Aeromobile. It's got a BMW engine. This company just started a little while ago. That's called the PAL Liberty. It folds up very neatly on the street, and then once you get to the airport, same, unfold, and it's more of a helicopter kind of thing. All of these require pilot's licenses. This is the Blackfly. It looks ridiculous. It's not a car, but it's got total drone technology. It's all computerized. It takes about 10 hours of joystick training, and you can fly it. It's totally done by wire. And then this is the Muller Sky Car. It marries sort of the car idea with the drone technology, and it's also on the market. And there's about a half dozen others, right? This is the VW's entry into the flying car. And eventually, I think, oh, by the way, here's New Hampshire. They've legalized flying cars. They're the first state to do so. And this is a concept car, but this is kind of like where everyone says it's all going. Computerized flying. This is a pod that you would call on your on your iPad. It would confirm that you're you and where you're going and where you currently are. It would pull up to where you are and pick you up. And if it's drivable, right, then it would just take you there. But if not, the wings would appear and take you off, right? Now, this car, it's almost here. Here's an article that says 2023, the Aeromobile will be for sale. And here's the Economist. It says it looks like it's almost here. And here's another magazine. Smithsonian says the future of the car, it's already here. That's from 2016. And is it there? Okay. Hello. There we go. And that's me. I wrote this story, and half the car companies mentioned in it have gone bankrupt. And half the ones that are currently out weren't even existing at the time that I wrote that. Remember that ad that I showed you? Here's the Aeromobile, that car. This is from last year. Might almost happen. They went bankrupt this year. That's from a few months ago. And the Terrafugia, the company in Massachusetts that made the American car plane, it's been bought by the Chinese. The whole factory's been moved over to China, and they're no longer making flying cars. We don't know what they're doing now. Here's the thing. Everything I wrote at that time was absolutely right. And it's the same with all of these articles. They appear all the time. So how did I get it completely right and absolutely wrong? And can we get it right and see what a future car might actually look like? Well, let's start with a theory about invention. There's this one notion that the fantasies of one pop culture in one generation become, hello,
and lock onto us.
become the reality of the next generation. This is early 1970s Star Trek. There's Kirk on his communicator. And that's an ad for the Motorola flip phone from 20 years later. Yeah. Only $9.99. Call today. So, by this argument, we should have had a flying car a long time ago. Because our pop culture has been telling us that we deserve a flying car for a long time. Doesn't matter whether the story is set in the past or the future, here, outer space, doesn't matter. Our pop culture has been telling us all of our lives that we're going to get a flying car. Even wizards deserve a flying car. Make no mistake, this signaling has been going on for a long time. This is the 1974 movie, James Bond movie, Man with the Golden Gun. That's an evil genius, Ricardo Montalban, escaping with Hervé Villachez, you may remember. And look carefully, that's a flying Pinto. Well, laugh all you want, because there was, in fact, a flying Pinto car company in 1974. And this is their ad, and just like all American flying cars, it has a family, parks in the garage, you drive it. It's so easy, you just attach the wings. Look, you just do a couple of bolts there, and you got your plane. Let your wife in, put your kids in there, you know. And this car was flown two times. The first time by a very nervous professional pilot, and the second time by the two guys who created the company. It crashed, they died, and the company absolutely went under. And a few years later, the Pinto became one of the deadliest cars known to all Americans on the road, and the whole Pinto story became a kind of Stephen King novel. So I started digging, and I found that 1954,
Aerocar.
we had a flying car. There it is.
There were barriers to the
Taylor
success
Aerocar.
of the Aero.
It's a little cute bug of a thing. Gets in there.
At last, I'm in a car that really does fly.
And then?
This tricky little two-seater, passing its tests with flying colors in the sky over Danbury, Connecticut, is called the Airphibian. It's an airborne automobile, a new approach to the old problems of traffic hazards and getting somewhere in a hurry. The propeller comes off in a jiffy. Just a few turns is all it takes for the inventor of the novel craft. The Airphibian was designed and built by a company headed by Robert Fulton, an air-age descendant of the steamboat inventor. There are two locks to disconnect, and the wing assembly is detached. It's easy to operate, easy to fly, and on the road it does an easy 45 miles per hour. It may not be long before the Airphibian is a common sight around local airports. The airplane is now at home on the highway.
You know, I should have stopped, but I found one more. 1935. Yes, this car, same story, out of the garage. The narrative always seems to be the same. Also, travels on the road, stops at the gas station. Because the American car has to be, you know, very easy. That's the way we want it. And it very easily assembles. You just pull up to the airport and you fly off. This car was made in 1935. This is 2 years before Amelia Earhart's airplane went down. So essentially, we've been flying cars and creating flying car companies for almost 100 years. All of them getting funded and all of them going bust. I think the flying car is sort of like the jetpack. You know, we invented that too. It was decades ago. Sean Connery escaped on one in that 1965 James Bond movie Thunderball. And two guys with jetpacks were the halftime entertainment at the 1967 Super Bowl. I think there's certain technologies and inventions that just sort of tickle our fantasies of the future, but they don't really satisfy any actual need, or maybe they're just too complicated, demands too much of us, who knows. But they make us think about the future. So I decided I would step back a little bit. Let's look at the car's past for a second and see what that might tell us. Now, one of the things you have to understand is that the car, for most of its existence in the early days, was a joke. It was a hot mess. It was noisy. It didn't run very well. It tipped over. It often had to be pulled out of the mud by horses. I'm sure there were some old guys in those days, like, you know, guys in pickups today looking at stranded Teslas. That stuff is not going to catch on. The only thing about cars, and these early cars, they're very difficult to control. Allegedly, we have the first. Come on. Oh, okay. Hang on. I can't make that work. Can I? Nope. Okay, there it is. This is supposed to be the first car accident. I don't know if that's true, but the car couldn't brake very well, so of course this kind of thing happened all the time. But what I wanted to really show you was this clip here. This is San Francisco in 1905, and this is Market Street. And just look at what you're seeing here. Everything is in the street. Businessmen, there's bicycles, there's cable cars, newsboys, kids playing, there's horses over there, buggies, wagons, and of course combustion engine cars. And that's how the car existed for the longest time until it started going a little faster than all of those other conveyances. And then it became an incredible menace. People started dying a lot, mostly children. Editorial pages were filled with horror stories of kids getting run over. Here's an editorial against the great Moloch. That's the Old Testament false god who demanded the sacrifice of living children. So many people died in these car, slaughters that there were protests all the time. Bad intersections would cause these protests. At the height of Jim Crow and lynching in America, the races came together on this one issue, running children over. There were articles in the newspapers denouncing the car all the time. This is the New York Times. This is right after World War I. Let me just read you that first paragraph. It says, "The horrors of war appear to be less appalling than the horrors of peace. The automobile looms up as a more destructive piece of mechanism than the machine gun. The reckless motorist deals more death than the artilleryman. The man in the street seems less safe than the man in the trench." And in this story, you find out that President Coolidge has appointed Herbert Hoover, who, it's hard to remember this, but he was considered the most effective bureaucrat in the world at the time. He had saved Europe from starvation. He is chairing this commission to resolve this problem. And, the car companies realized they were in big trouble. So, they started pushing against all of these various solutions. In Cincinnati, this is a vote on whether to enforce cars to have governors to lower their speed. This is the car company ad saying, do you want to become China? Most backward nation in the world, says it right there in the ad. Still, the death toll continued. This is people built monuments to the car dead in their cities. This is chiseled on the side of this one. It reads, "Erected by the citizens of Baltimore in memory of the 130 children whose lives were sacrificed by accident during the year 1921. Right, that's just Baltimore. That's 1 year, 131 children. Car companies knew they were in big trouble. They needed a makeover. They needed a PR campaign. They needed new vocabulary. So, in those days, there was a common word for hick or hillbilly. They were called a J. A J was somebody usually from the Midwest who didn't know cities very well. And when they would come into town in their buggies with their horses that would get spooked by cars and whatnot, and trolley cars, they were called J drivers. And J drivers were stupid. They were incompetent. They didn't know how to operate in a sophisticated town, right? So the car companies very neatly coined the word jaywalker. It's funny, it's the only word we have left from that era, is jaywalker, right? And there were statutes passed. There were public campaigns, there were editorial cartoons. But basically what they were doing is they were shifting the blame of the accident from the driver to the pedestrian. Now it was their fault because they're stupid. This is a parade in New York where that's a clown who just keeps getting run over by that Model T Ford. All the crowd on the side laughing hilariously at this idiot crossing the street without looking. So naturally, the tech guys of the day, they knew this was the big problem they had to solve. They were on it. The Silicon Valley of 1925 had the solution.
Thanks to the inventive minds of two Sheffield engineers, the safety scoop has arrived. It can be fitted to bumpers or take the place of them, and it folds neatly away when it isn't eating pedestrians. When the scoop is open, a jaywalker simply can't get run over, and sometimes that's more than he deserves.
Did you catch that last line? Sometimes that's more than he deserves. Yeah. We learned how to hate jaywalkers. And then after the war, we kind of enter what you might want to call the golden era of the American car, right? We started designing them to look cool and to feel cool and to run through space in a really neat way. Because the car companies at this point had vanquished the street. Everybody had been pushed off to the side. The cars own the street. Maybe they'd once been, useful machines, but now they were the most American thing that there was. According to car historian Peter Norton, the phrase love affair with the automobile was first uttered by Groucho Marx on October 22nd, 1961, on the NBC program Merrily We Roll Along, astonishingly funded by a company heavily invested in car manufacturing. So this idea, the romance of the car, was partly true, because we did love cars, but also partly manufactured by the companies. That phrase, if you look at Google, it's still very much in heavy rotation. But then something really strange happened in the 1990s. They still don't know why it happened. It's been much studied, but most car historians date it to 1996. But car testers started to detect that many buyers no longer wanted a cool car or a sweet-looking car or a pleasure craft or a maneuverable car or a sports car. They wanted a safe car, and thus was born the SUV. Now, here's the thing about SUVs. They're not actually that safe. They're not as safe as smaller cars. They're heavy, they're unmaneuverable, they crash, they roll over, they lose control a lot, they don't corner very well, and they don't brake as swiftly as a small car. But here's the key. Buyers didn't care.
Was in the
about
white
actual
Hyundai
safety.
on his way
They
to
preferred
9
feel
a.m.
safe,
Sunday
up
Mass.
high,
The driver of the
inside of a
SUV
tank,
is said to have experienced a
and
seizure
actually be
and
safer.
lost control.
So the era of near misses, and here's a couple of the era of, the near miss was slowly receding. There was a whole new class of car accidents that didn't exist before, because the smaller cars would have avoided that accident, but SUVs just plowed forward and got into those accidents, right? And the key thing here is that people chose to feel safer than be safer. So we entered this kind of era of fraudulence about our cars. We cared more about our feelings about the car, our ideas about cars, than the reality of the car. So check this out. This is a Harley Davidson engine. You all recognize it because, of course, that sound is patented. It's one of the most famous sounds in the world. If you look at that YouTube note, that's 2 hours of Harley Davidson noise. That's it. That's the whole video. It's just somebody listening to Harley Davidson for 2 hours. But we know that sound. And you know this sound. That's a Mustang. And you know this sound. Dodge Ram. And when I was reporting on this many years ago, I found out that the designers in Detroit had long ago figured out how to make a quiet engine. But when they went to sell it, no one wanted to buy it. They wanted that sound. So they created it. That's a manufactured noise. Test market showed that we wanted that nice, meaty rumble. It became a scandal for a while. The fact that most of our noises coming out of the cars were somehow tampered with, wasn't real. Well, we got over that. Nowadays, almost every sound that you hear in your car is manufactured. The newest BMW has now, of course, an entire orchestra of sounds that you can choose from. I don't know if you've seen the movie Batman Begins or any of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, but the composer on all of those movies, hundreds of movies, one of the most famous Hollywood composers, Hans Zimmer, has a new job these days.
Composer Hans Zimmer has created the noises for this BMW iX M60. So in personal mode, normal mode, when you're driving along, you get this sound. Like a spacecraft taking off. But you can make it more extreme by going into sports mode. Now listen. The next mode I'm going to go into is called expressive. Listen to this noise. Quite someone playing an organ, or that noise when you're watching a horror movie and something bad's about to happen. So to chill out, I'm going to go for relax mode. It's like being in a spa. That's more peaceful.
So, specialized computers have slowly taken over much of the control of our car. And in doing so, have solved many of the gnarlier problems of driving. YouTube video is filled with amazed drivers having fun with a lot of this new technology, like this guy.
An optional parking assist. And what that means is if I put this in reverse, I hit OK, it sizes up the space, I hit the gas, and oh God, okay, all right. It's doing this on, oh God, okay, all right. Holy shit. And it parallel parked the car for me.
Volvo has helped pioneer the automatic emergency braking system. This thing's amazing. So it uses LiDAR. It detects the stopped object. It does instant calculation of how much brake pressure has to be applied to not hit that car. And it does it, you don't even have your foot on the brake. It doesn't care if you can put your foot on the brake. Look at that, right? So right now the Department of Transportation here is considering a proposal to make that mandatory in every car and truck. It's in most trucks now. Like I said, it doesn't matter whether you put your foot on the brake. It's going to do it for you. It's already in operation in many places. This is a real piece of video. That's a child running out in front of a truck. I mean, if a human were operating that truck, right. So, there are numerous of these new systems. This is a distraction system. Most car accidents are caused by distraction or fatigue. And it reads your face, it sees you yawning, right? It looks at your eyelids if they're lowering by even a micrometer. And it sends messages back to, in this case, a trucking company, telling that this is the software for trucking monitoring. Those things on the side there say yawning, distraction, fatigue. They're measures. And they tell the dispatcher whether the driver is driving safely or not. I rented a car recently, and I was doing that thing where I saw the white lines, that had everything in the right place, but I just happened to glance over here for a little too long. I don't know what I was looking at, but something. And after about a second, the car said to me, "Keep your eyes on the road." And I had another rental once tell me, like, "It might be time for a coffee break." So there are just so many of these smart technologies because these computerized systems now allow us to put almost anything into a car. And slowly but surely what we're finding is that increasingly you're barely in control of the car. Uphill, downhill assist, it's slowing your car down without you even doing it, right? It's telling you that there's something in your blind spot without you even looking, right? And every year there's more and more of these things. Yesterday, I have a Google alert for this talk, but yesterday, Mercedes was licensed for the first time to have a totally automatic feature on its new models be legally used on interstates. So it's only on interstates. You have to have the white lines, have to be clear, no exits, that kind of thing. But you can take your hands off the wheel, you can take your eyes off the road, you can read a book. It's now legal in the new Mercedes in this country, okay? You can watch a movie legally in the driver's seat, right? That's where we're at today, right? For the last several years, we've been hearing about the autonomous car. And maybe one day we'll have one. This is a concept idea of what the new Apple car might look like. Now, if you Google this, you'll find that there's very little information about the Apple car, except that Tim Cook does acknowledge that it does exist. It's called Project Titan. There's like 1,000 engineers squirreled away on some campus that we don't know about. They're trying to create the iCar, right? There's rumors of super new batteries and super new computer chips that'll be specialized in total autonomy of this car. This image, by the way, is fashioned by someone who gathered all the patent applications by Apple and tried to reverse engineer what the car might look like. So we don't really know. But, you know, it almost doesn't matter because the future of the car is almost incidental. Because this war is not between GM and Ford. It's not even between the combustion engine and the electric car. All those fights are settled, really. The combustion engine is pretty much finished. Where the heat is today is software. You read the car magazines and the online sites, and you look at what drives the market, and it's the fight between Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. GM just recently decided to drop both and develop their own car software. Smart. That's where the money is, but it's probably too late. Apple CarPlay, for instance, is available today in 98% of all cars on the market because the car itself is the final frontier of the next digital invasion. Americans spend most of their time in their home and the second most amount of time in their work. But the third most occupied place is the car. And it's the last place where we humans engage in what Silicon Valley calls dead time. That is, not engaged with our devices. Dead time. That's what we used to call driving. And if Silicon Valley can liberate our attention from the road, that's 600 billion hours a year. That's not a car, that's a gold rush. The future car will harvest all that data, where we go, what we buy, where we look, when we're tired, and crunch it all into 1,000 new retail experiences. The future car might look like a car on the outside, but inside, what it will really look like is an iPhone. Good luck. Thank you. And I'm told we'll take your questions. Speak up. Oh, yeah, yes. Larry, you want to? Okay. Sure.
Internal combustion engine. I mean, is it really done? I even saw in AAA magazine concerns about the new electric cars and the harvesting of the minerals that are needed and whether, in fact, it is environmentally so much better. How do you relate to that, or, you know, what's your thought on that?
Well, let's just talk about the reality of the combustion engine car. One of the things that I didn't put in that slideshow was something that I found that I just think is amazing. But there's a number of different car farms that have already started, opened up for business. There's one in upstate New York. You can Google it. It's Monticello, M-O-N-T-E, not I. And it's a car park, like where horses went. You know, in fact, the main joint where you keep your cars is called the stables, right? There are already people who have taken their very expensive, fancy cars and put them away in these garages where workers work on them. And you come out to your club, you can have a nice little lunch overlooking the course, and you get in your car, and you just drive around through the woods and have nice little routes. Sometimes they have little races. You can participate in them. But the car never leaves the farm, right? And, you know, the horse went through exactly the same thing. The horse was once the most used, you know, farm animal that we had. And now it's, you know, used for equestrian events, and occasionally a cop will have one in the city. But other than that, the horse is, you know, he's out to pasture. And I know about this because the CEO of GM once, when I was interviewing him, Roger, what's his name? Can't remember. But yes, big, lovely guy with huge. He'd smoke these ginormous cigars. I mean, he looked like if you could cartoon a CEO of a car company, it would be this guy. And But he had his car out at Monticello. He's the one who told me about it. He's the one who introduced the electric car to GM. He doesn't care about the electric car that much, but he knows that that's where we're gonna wind up. An electric car is a motor and a bunch of wires. There's no oil. There's no lubricants. There's not all of the things that break in a combustion engine car. They're not in an electric car, which makes it perfect for Silicon Valley, who wants to turn this into a machine where we don't have to pay attention that much. And I'm not sure we'll get the fully autonomous car. There's liability questions in there that are kind of interesting. But we might end up driving only 2% of the time, or 5% of the time. And then the rest of that time, the car would be like our iPhone. We'd be able to play with it, play on it, call people, shop, do all those kind of things.
What about this news about the charging capacity now with the convergence of Tesla, GM, and Ford? The implication for that?
So just to explain what Larry's talking about, Tesla had its own dedicated charging stations, and all the other car companies, electric car companies, had to use this other system, CC something. And but now Tesla has opened the door to all the cars companies can now come and with an adapter, fuel up at the Tesla station. Well, that's actually an incredibly smart move. I mean, imagine if you owned all of the gas stations in America in 1952. Or maybe you own 90% of them. That would be a pretty good thing to do, to have. And Musk is now very brightly going to be the energy supplier. It may not. The Tesla car may not even matter in the future. He'll have the charging stations. That's probably a lot more money than the car.
In the future, because I know it's changing a lot where we buy our cars, how we buy our cars. Will we buy our car in the future at CarMax, Amazon, a car dealership, or an Apple store?
Right. Well, it's so maybe all of those places. I mean, certainly people will still want to buy a car that they individually control. But, I taught my children how to drive 10 years ago. And I would say that most of their peers, their parents didn't teach them to drive and didn't want to teach them to drive. They were terrified that they'd get hurt in a car. So you have this whole generation of kids growing up who don't know how to drive and kind of don't want to. So, and if you live in a big city, like, my kids now live in Brooklyn, they get around by Uber. Why would they want a car? You have to, garage costs almost as much as an apartment. So all of that stuff just has turned off. I mean, the Gen, millennials and Gen Z, they don't have that romantic notion that we all had, grew up with about a car. I mean, I couldn't wait to get my driver's license when I was 15, South Carolina 15. But the day I turned 15, I was at the DMV, right? And I had my car. It was a Mustang, by the way.
One final question, then we want to open it up. The flying car, you left us thinking maybe or not. I don't know. I mean, is it dead?
No, we have it. We've had it for 100 years. And, they're out there. Those companies exist, and they've all sold a few. The Amphibian, the one with the newsreel footage, he sold like 6 of them. By the way, he was out of Danbury. I don't know if you could hear that. That guy was from Danbury. And I think one of them is still there. I was hoping to get one here for you. That might be too much of an ask.
I came in one.
Yeah. But it's just like the jetpack. It's like the other one is the video phone. The video phone, you can find examples of it back in the early 50s. And nowadays we Zoom, and so we have adapted a kind of video phone. But for most of time, no one wanted a video phone. In part because it did too much. If you had a video phone, then you had to get dressed up to make a phone call. That's just too much work, right? We'd rather have the phone, and now we don't even want the phone. Texting. I don't even want to have to articulate a tone in my voice. It's too much work. I could just like a little smiley face, So I think the problem with the flying car and the jetpack is just there's too much going on. It requires too much learning. Pilots love them. And like I said, that weird black fly thing that looks like a tin can bobbling around on the ground. That's actually the safest probably of all of those vehicles because it's completely fly-by-wire.
All right.
Yeah.
I know you were up earlier.
about the safety testing on this. Like I was watching you use the clicker and, it malfunctioned. And as we all know, computers do malfunction. And, I did not know about this Mercedes that can drive itself. Like,
it just happened yesterday. I mean, I'm literally pulled that off the headlines yesterday.
Oh, wow. So, I'm just wondering, like, what features do these cars have when the computer malfunctions? I know to some of these engineers that's inconceivable, but as a user, that does happen.
Right. And, one of the things is we're going to have to kind of recalculate our risk-benefit analysis when it comes to cars. For the last 10 years, there have been all this noise and coverage about, the occasional Tesla catches on fire. Thousands of combustion engine cars catch on fire every year, but it doesn't make the news. I just passed one the other day going to Hartford. Total car engulfed in flames. I thought that only happened on the Simpsons TV show. I didn't know cars actually burst into flames, but apparently they do. So it will be hard for us to actually crunch this information that these cars are actually safer. It's like the SUV. We don't care that it's not safer. By the way, one fun detail about the SUV, the reasons there's so many cup holders is that they found that the more cup holders you have, the more people associate the car with the safety of their own kitchen. And so that's just all about us feeling like, oh, I'm feeling very comfortable in this car. I got 17 cup holders,
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know if we want to wait until the mic gets to you.
Two-part question. I just read something, and I'm wondering if you read it or somebody else read it, about something about more children than previously suspected have been killed by self. Does this resonate with anybody else? It was a headline either in the Washington Post or the New York Times. So I'm wondering if
So you're saying more children have been killed by self-driving cars or electric cars or what?
I think it was self-driving cars. So again, I'm vague on this. I tried to look it up at my internet.
I think you mean the SUVs because of their height, and you can't see them in a driveway.
Yeah, I was okay.
Not self-driving because there's so few really out there.
Right, there aren't.
Okay.
Well, there aren't any totally self-driving.
Okay,
cars,
but my real
except for this
question is,
Mercedes.
there are moral issues raised by self-driving cars. Example, does the car swerve to avoid the child, or does it swerve because there's an object in the road, or does it swerve because there's a dog and a child, and what does the car decide to do? So I'm interested in how those issues get handled by policy, and where that policy gets made, and what do those moral issues mean for us as a culture?
Right, the old trolley car issue, right?
Yes.
The philosophical conundrum for
right.
that you're controlling the trolley car, and there's a fork in the rails, and to the left one person gets killed, and to the right 10. So your call. So they've been working on this for a very long time. And by the way, one of the reasons why the Google car, do you remember the Google car had the little thing up top, and there were all these tests for 10 years ago, right? Don't hear about the Google car anymore. Maybe they're doing it in secret. But one of the reasons why the Google car isn't publicly known as much as it once was is, emergency, is that kids very quickly figured out that the programming in the car, they would automatically just stop the car if anybody stepped in front of it. So that just became like a fun youth prank. You would just jump in front of the car all the time and just stop it. So they kind of had to move so they haven't figured out that either.
Do you have thoughts about how those policies are going to be?
When I interviewed a car, when I did that story 7 years ago for Smithsonian, I did interview this guy, and he was quite evasive about how we will program in those decisions. I mean, right now we have this automatic braking, but like you said, I mean, if a dog runs out from this way and a child runs out this way, how is the robot going to make that choice? Because it will be the robot. I will say that the robot's choice will be made infinitely faster than a human choice.
What about insurance?
Well, that's why I hedged about the totally autonomous car, because I think that the car companies will probably want our hand on that wheel at some point so that liability can go to us and not them. It's sort of like the jaywalker. Let's just make sure somebody else has to pay the price. Yeah.
Yes, if you can get over there.
So the average car on the road today is more than 12 years old. That average has been going up. I would suggest that the transition you're talking about is going to happen, but it's going to take quite a bit of time, and I suspect it's going to be quite bumpy. The sort of moral issues that was referred to earlier are sort of related to a whole bunch of legal and political issues, and that's the world I came from. We have no idea what we're doing at this point in those areas. And it's going to be messy, and it's going to be bumpy.
Don't worry, artificial intelligence is here to help. Because we've thought that one through.
The other thing that Jack and I were talking about before was the infrastructure bill. We've got a lot of rebuilding going on right now. To what degree is all of this future being borne out by these plans that you've seen so far, Jack?
Yeah, and I know Colorado has instituted some of this building into their infrastructure, into their highways and whatnot, the technology needed to communicate with a car. So that eventually another aspect of the future car, whether it's electric or combustion engine, will be probably a mandatory transponder in your car, which means it will be able to communicate with other cars and make those decisions for you again, right? So if the car in front of you just rapidly stops, your car is going to know that instantly, long before you visually even see it, right? And then perhaps save your life by stopping. There's moral questions with it, but there's also just political questions of like, how much would Americans in particular want to cede that kind of control to a distant computer rather than have that control themselves? You know? Yeah.
Thank you. So knowing that facial recognition works better on pale skin and there are more car crashes in poor areas, so that wealth disparity just makes transit more dangerous. Thinking about, and also knowing that this technology requires functioning infrastructure. It requires those white lines to be readable and
Correct.
seeable.
Right.
There's a
Good point.
potential to like need more investment in the infrastructure, but simultaneously, we're not great at doing that equitably and using this kind of technology. I just wonder about your thoughts about either making that better or worse. Thank you.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think like, you know, I've lived long enough to see like different generations of cars come onto the road. And, you know, there is always like 10 years ago, I remember seeing like the number of abandoned 1972, like, you know, Cadillacs on the side of the road. It was unbelievable. It's like the giant TVs that suddenly were just on the sidewalks for about 2 years, and then they're all gone now, right? But there is like, you know, as these things happen, there is definitely going to be people who are just going to stick with their clunkers, right? Maybe we'll have remember, what was that called? Something for clunkers. Remember, it was under Obama, where he bought cash for clunkers, right? You know, which is a pretty good idea, right? We'll take the 100,000 worst cars, gas guzzlers off the road, and subsidize you to go replace it with something that's a little bit better. Maybe something like that could happen. But you're right, we should anticipate that, because that will happen.
I can't see out there. Let me ask you a quick question.
There's one question right here, yeah.
Okay.
Speak loudly.
Loudly.
I really appreciate your perspectives on human behavior. And the mic drop for me, I hadn't ever thought about the 600 billion hours that we spend behind the wheel. As a 25-year veteran teacher, I watched the smartphone in our schools just decimate so many learning opportunities. And I'm interested to hear about your kids. I'm interested about the next generation thinking very differently about transportation, as well as how they're being controlled via smartphones, via AI, all this other stuff. What do you see for upcoming generations resisting this sort of robotic control that's happening right now in so many different spheres?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I just learned this. So part of the rebellion of Gen Z is not to have smart devices. So there's an increasing number of Gen Z types who get flip phones or don't have phones at all. And in part, it's because they're rebelling against their parents, who spent their lives staring at the screen instead of them. And so they're like, the hell with that thing, right? They hate that phone, but not for the reasons that we think they should hate it, right? But so the next generation is not like the millennials or my generation. You know, they're a little different, and you're going to keep hearing that they're the ones buying vinyl. You know, they're interested in these other forms of technology, not the sleek, you know, Apple stuff. I don't know if that will translate to cars, but there's a little ray of hope. I'm just giving you some hope. Okay. Yes, one question over there.
I have two comments and a question. Yeah. You know, you were wondering about the liability questions of autonomous driving. Mercedes is accepting liability when their self-driving technology is
they are?
Yeah,
okay.
That's the only way that you can get level 3 approved in the United States.
Right.
Your comment on the communication in the roadways, I feel like we're reinventing trains at this point, because that's how trains work. Yeah,
right,
the rails
nice.
Communicate in blocks and tell the car how fast they should go. But my question for you is around the impatience of the American public and how long it takes to charge an electric car. I drive a Mach-E. I love it to death, but it takes a really long time to charge, even when you're on a road trip and using DC fast charging. I wonder if, as a society, we're going to be able to overcome the impatience of, hey, we're on a road trip, but we're adding a day of traveling cross country just to charge the car. You know, I wonder how we're going to overcome that.
You know, that's going to be the number one issue. Right?
Well, yeah.
I mean,
I
you
work
can
for
fill
the
up
power
your
company,
gas
yeah.
guzzler in 2 minutes, but you can't fill up your electric car in under an hour. You know, one solution might be what used to, 150 years ago, the entire fleet of cabs in New York City were all electric cars. You forget that when the car got invented, there were all these there were steam-powered cars, there were combustion engine cars, there were electric cars. And the electric car was perfect for the cabs of New York because they could run for about an hour on, the old, 12-volt battery there. And then they just come back to the shop and switch out the battery and go back out, right? So I don't know if that something like that could even happen, but
Tesla was trying to invent that. They wanted to swap out the battery at the charging station for an additional fee.
Right.
So I'm surprised they didn't do it yet.
that may happen. Although I see that every 6 months is a new story about how faster we're charging things. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you. Thanks for all your comments. I have two comments and no questions.
You're that guy. Okay.
Yeah. One about charging time.
Yeah.
So I was at a local meeting of the American Chemical Society, of which I'm a member, about 5 or 8 years ago, and the company up in Wallingford that was producing hydrogen using solar power actually brought in a Toyota demo hydrogen fuel cell car, and the speaker was the head of research there. She said that she fills up with hydrogen in 5 minutes, so it's comparable. I mean, hydrogen has a long way to go before it can become a commercially viable fuel, but technologically, it's an answer to consider with some consideration. And I forgot my.
I feel like hydrogen is sort of like the cold fusion of energy sources that I keep reading about every 6 months. Some new breakthrough about hydrogen
that it's going to happen,
and it never quite gets there. But
well, you don't need a break. You just need to invest in the infrastructure to make green hydrogen. And right now, hydrogen, I believe, is something like five-fold more expensive than electricity or fossil fuel gasoline. And unfortunately, I've forgotten the second comment, but it was triggered. It was triggered by.
It was brilliant.
Yeah, it was triggered by what you just said. It'll come to me in 5 minutes, and I'll ask for the mic back.
Question on your left. Hello. Yeah. Question on your left. With millennials, right over here. With millennials and Gen Zs kind of taking over the world at this point, there seems to be less of an importance of personal car ownership,
right,
and kind of a migration to car sharing and things of that nature. How do you see that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they're definitely the car companies. I think one of the reasons why so much of the shift for profit is towards software is because they don't see huge sales like they did for the last 100 years, because that generation is not buying cars. if you ask them why not, they would tell you because you boomers stole all the money and took all of our wealth and are wasting our our heritage, so we don't have a chance to buy a car or buy a house. Though that's one argument. But also, I just lives are led so differently now. You don't need a car as much as we did 10 or 15 years ago. That would be one of their arguments. And by the way, if you read up on what little we know about the Apple car, the one argument is that what they intend to replace is not the car, but Uber. That the Apple car will never have a driver. You will just summon it, get in it, then you will be in your digital bubble and talking to the car, and it will just take you where you want to go. Supposedly, that's the idea. Anyway, that's one answer to your question.
Only a few minutes left, so.
What's your name?
Jack Hitt.
Jack Hitt?
Hitt, H-I-T-T.
Oh, Jack Hitt, thank you. Okay, do you believe in alcohol for fuel, or do you believe in turbine engine?
Do I believe in alcohol-fueled engines? Is that what you said?
And do you like a turbine engine?
I'm not. Are you saying turbo engine?
No, turbine, an engine instead of pistons, an engine that has turbines.
Oh, I don't know anything about it, so I plead ignorance, and maybe after this gathering you can tell me what it is.
Okay.
There was a question here. Yes.
Yeah.
Ma'am, can you stand up maybe quickly because we're running out of time.
Hi, my concerns, is this broadcasting? Can you hear me?
It is.
Okay. My concerns have to do with our uncritical beliefs in the accuracy of software. I got interested in this problem in relation to cars when Eileen Hertzberg was killed by an Uber car in testing in Arizona. Turned out that the software did not include anything about a pedestrian not within a crosswalk.
You mean they were jaywalking?
Right. She was jaywalking at night with a bicycle and packages on it, which then confused her shape. She was not identified by the car.
Right.
In the course of my explorations of this issue, I'm interested in things visual for all of you. I came across a company in San Francisco bragging about its ability to quickly identify things in video for the use in autonomous vehicles, right? That's the first start, is that humans identify things in video. Well, they said proudly, well, we can be more accurate on highways because there are no pedestrians on highways.
True that.
And all I could think of was, well, what happens to those people that stop to take a leak along the way? What happens to the cops who pull over someone and they're walking? What about an accident where there's a confused person who gets out of a car that's damaged in the roadway? Okay. So I think that we're very naive to think that software engineering is somehow or other perfected.
Absolutely. I will just agree with that. And I think we have to say...
Well, we have less than a minute.
Oh.
Is there one safety feature that you're really enamored with, that you really think we haven't been paying enough attention to, that is really going to come into regular use?
Well, the National Department of Transportation Safety and so on is considering a proposal to make that emergency braking system that I showed you mandatory in every car and truck. And I can't see any reason why you wouldn't want that. I mean, it will mean that your car will take over driving or stopping for you. But if it means not crashing into a car, I mean, most car accidents are, rear-enders. It would prevent a lot of those. But anyway, that's a great one. So.
Well, thank you all. Jack Hitt.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and enjoy the festival.